Hey there, and welcome to the video on variables. So in the last lesson or in the last video, you learned kind of the fundamentals of JavaScript and adding it to your HTML file. So for example, let's say I have this HTML file, and let me bring up my page on the right here. And so I just have a scratch file here, and it has a script tag which contains a line of JavaScript code that writes "Hello World" to the page, and so there we go. So you learned how to do that kind of thing in the previous previous video. So now let's build on that and talk about variables. So in the last video, I said that one of the most fundamental building blocks of JavaScript, or of coding in general, really, is calling functions. I would say that one of the second most fundamental building block is variables. So I'm going to talk about that next. Before we talk about variables, let me talk about values for a second. So you've seen passing parameters into a function, which means giving a function more information about what you want it to do. So in this case, we say document.write, which is a function. And then we say what we want to write to the document. We say write this to the document, which is where we get that. So that's a parameter, and we call this thing a value as well. So this is a value that we're passing in as a parameter. And there are a couple different kinds of parameters, or of values, different types of values. Here we see a string, and you can tell it's a string because it has single quotes before and after it. String is kind of a goofy name for it, but I think of it as like a string of characters or a string of letters. These can be numbers as well, but string of characters. There's a different type, which is just a number, and you can probably guess what that means. It's a number. So numbers do not get the single quotes if it's purely a number. So let me refresh this, and we see that the number 42 is written to the web page. So all right, we've got values. This 42 is a value that is being passed into the document.write function as a parameter. Let's talk about operators next. So you've probably seen most, or at least a good subset of the operators that you can use. They're a lot like the math symbols that you're used to. So we can say 42 plus 37, for example. And we can tell the computer, hey, take these two values and, in this case, add them up, and that will create a third value, which we then pass in as the parameter to the document.write function. So if I refresh that, 42 plus 37 is 79, and I'm not going to check that because I trust the computer. We can change that to multiplication, whatever. It's basically a fancy calculator, and it'll work kind of as expected. You can also throw in other things, whatever. String them together, string the operators together. So this kind of works how you might expect a calculator to work, and because that's kind of what a computer is a big old expensive calculator. So this is numbers, and they kind of work how you might expect. Let's go back to strings for a second. So if you've never seen using strings in code before, this might come off as a little surprising, but you can also use some operators, specifically the plus operator, on strings as well. And this will append the two strings together. So you'll have hello, and then I included a space here, and then plus world, which will append them together, create a third value, which is a string, and then write that to the document. So we get hello world here. Now, this is an example of using string values and the append operator to create a third one. Let me look at what I wanted to talk about next. Right. Okay. So this is strings, right? Now let's go back to talking about numbers and strings. By that I mean, what would we expect this to do? And if we were in person, I would maybe pause here and like get some guesses. But maybe I would recommend just thinking to yourself, like, what do you think will happen? What do you think should happen? I'm gonna refresh, and you get 1, 2, 3, 4, which may or may not surprise you depending on whether you thought of these as like strings of characters or as numbers. Because it has these quotation marks around it, we are telling the computer, don't treat these as numbers, treat them as strings of characters. And so when we say add two strings together, that means take the left one and then the right one and just kind of put them together. There's no like mathematical addition happening here. So that's the main reason that we say like it's important to like not use quotation marks when you're not talking about strings. Use the like proper syntax for numbers, because now this will add them together. I'll also maybe just point out that I'm kind of lying here. So let's see here. So like, what should this do? And there are some, like I said, like I wish I could pause here and elicit guesses, because there's many options to choose from. Like what should happen here? I'm honestly, not sure, like purely logically what should happen, but JavaScript has rules in it that will, in this case, what will happen is JavaScript sees that you are trying to multiply two strings together, and it says, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. Let me check. Are these strings actually numbers? And if they are, then I'll multiply them as if they are numbers. So this is called type coercion, which is a fancy word for JavaScript will try to check if you meant a different type, and try to do the right thing. And honestly, this gets really confusing, and people like to make fun of JavaScript for it because it's not always super obvious what will happen in a certain case. But I mean, honestly, JavaScript is being logical. It just might not be following logic that you might agree with. Anyway, all of that to say, like, use single quotation marks when you are working with strings, and don't use them when you're working with numbers. There are other types as well, but we'll talk about them kind of later, and I would just kind of focus on strings and numbers for now. Okay, so next, so that's values and operators, and now next let's talk about like variables themselves. So variables let you create a name that points to a value being something like this, or something like a number or whatever. Variables let you create a name that points to a value that you can then reuse. So I'm going to maybe just steal the example directly from this page, but let's maybe just let's steal that. I don't know if it's plagiarism if I'm stealing it from myself. That's kind of gross. Whatever, doesn't really matter, I guess. I get kind of obsessive over formatting my code, but whatever. It doesn't really matter. What I want to say is, on this line of code, we are creating a variable using the let keyword, and then we are giving the variable a name, in this case answer, and then we're using the equals operator, I guess, to assign the value 42 to answer. So we're saying take answer and point that to 42. And now that we have that, we can use that pretty much anywhere that we can use a value. In this case, we are doing the string append operator again and sending that result to the document.write function. So let me just refresh, and there we go. We have our message, which was created from a variable by using a variable. And that might not seem super useful, but again, stealing code from myself. Let's go to an example where we have something like this. And we have 3 lines of code in our JavaScript here, which says hello world in 3 different places. So I'm going to refresh, and we see hello world in the dialog, we see hello world in the page, and we see hello world in the JavaScript console as well. And this is a contrived example, but it's a fairly common use case to want to do multiple things with the same value. And you'll talk about that in the upcoming weeks, but for now, maybe just trust me that this is a common use case. And so now, like, what if we wanted to change this to like hello my name, so like hello Kevin, and kind of annoyingly I have to change it in 3 places. Now I save it and I refresh it, and now I see hello Kevin, hello Kevin, hello Kevin. And now my boss comes around and I have to change it again, or like whatever, your requirements change is the common use case. So like now it's like goodbye, and now I have to change it again in 3 places, and it's just really annoying. So to save myself the trouble, what I can do is something like this, where I say like let message, creating a variable called message, and then I'm going to set it equal to my message, in this case hello Kevin, and then in my code I can use that variable. And now that I've done this kind of refactoring of my code to use this variable, first off, let me check that it actually works. Hello Kevin, hello Kevin, hello Kevin, sure. Now when I want to update it, maybe I want to not say hi to me anymore, I want to say hi to Ada Lovelace, the first programmer. I only have to change it here. I don't have to change it in 3 different places. And that becomes especially useful as your code gets longer and more complicated. Like maybe this line of code is actually in a different file, and this line of code is like way down 100 lines below you, and this one's somewhere else. So being able to change it in one place and having that reflect everywhere is one of the like helpful uses of variables. That's one of the reasons they're super popular. So next, what I want to talk about is storing data. So this is one use case of variables where you take a value and you want to reuse it in multiple places. Another use case of variables, it's a little wishy-washy on how you draw lines between use cases, but another way to think about it is that you can store data and then use it in multiple places. So we learned about a couple of functions. One was the alert function, and console.log and document.write, they're also functions. All of these functions do something. I'm kind of oversimplifying the distinction here, but you tell the document.write function to show a message in the web page, and that's what it does. You tell the computer to show an alert dialog with a certain message, and that's what it does. It just goes off and does something. There's another kind of function that returns something, and I'll give you an example. One of them is the prompt function. So let me say like let name equals prompt, what is your name? And semicolon, okay. So what I'm doing is I'm calling the prompt function. I'm giving it a parameter of what is your name, and then I am expecting that function call to return a value to me, which I am then storing in the name variable. So I'm saying create a variable called name and set it equal to whatever we get back from the prompt function. And so to demonstrate that, I'm going to refresh this. What is your name? And I can say Kevin. I can say okay. And the page still says hello Ada. Hello Ada. Hello Ada. But that's because we haven't used it yet. So that's totally expected. So I can say hello plus name plus, maybe I'll throw in an exclamation point for fun. And so what I'm doing here, first, like we just talked about, I'm creating a name variable and I'm setting it equal to whatever the prompt function returns. And then I'm creating a message variable from that name. And then I'm passing in that message variable to these various functions. So refresh one more time. And so this prompt function, what it does is it shows a prompt. It shows a dialog that has a little text area here that you can type in, and I can answer the question, what is your name? My name is Kevin, and I can say okay. And when I click okay, in my code, the prompt function returns, in this case, Kevin. It returns whatever I typed. So then it'll be as if I had said let name equals Kevin. So I'm going to click OK, and we see hello Kevin, and hello Kevin. So like I said, it's kind of an arbitrary distinction between like functions that are doing something and functions that are returning something, because like the prompt function also does stuff. So it's not like it's either or, but in this case, prompt returns a string, which is whatever the user typed in. It's also kind of arbitrary to say that variables are used for reusing values and for storing data, because, you know, what's the distinction between those two things? But they're kind of how I think about using variables. It's just kind of different use cases for why you would use them. So that's variables in a nutshell. I think that's as far as I am going to go as far as like new content. The last thing I want to mention, and you know, I'm debating with myself honestly, but I think I'm going to mention it only because like I really recommend you like read up on like all of these concepts like outside of these videos and outside of the tutorials I'm writing. So like if you type in JavaScript variables, you'll find a bunch of tutorials on the internet and you'll learn all about it. But I want to kind of prepare you for stuff that you'll see in these pages. Actually, I hadn't looked at this page before. This is exactly what I'm about to talk about. That's really funny. Anyway, so I want to kind of prepare you for stuff you'll see and not have you like caught too off guard by stuff that's on other tutorials. I'm kind of simplifying things, but I want to prepare you for stuff that you'll see in other places. So long story short, I recommend always using the let keyword. I think for the purposes of the next few weeks, I think having it in your brain that you should always use let to create a variable, I think that's totally fine. I think that's a reasonable takeaway. But just for the sake of kind of completeness, I'll show you some other ways to do it. So instead of let, I could say const, and it'll work the same in this case. I can say my name is Kevin. I'm kind of getting sick of typing my name, but there it is. Hello Kevin. Hello Kevin. Hello Kevin. And it'll do this exact same thing. Now the difference is that say I want to change that. So now I want to say actually name equals something else. My name is actually what's a good name? I'm just going to go back to Ada. Ada is my go-to example name, and I'm going to refresh this, and I'll say my name is Kevin, and you'll get an error actually. And you know nothing is showing and things have broken, and that's actually intentional because const is telling the computer create this variable and never let me change the value. So when you get to this line, the computer is, hey, you lied to me, you told me you would never change this variable, and now here you are trying to change it, which is, you know, it might not be obvious why that's useful, but it's helpful once you start writing more complicated code because it adds a like safety check basically. It's a security check that when you create a variable and you know that you never want to change it, then you can use the const keyword. The other way to do it is to use the var or var keyword. I actually don't know how to pronounce it, but it's var or var. I think I say var most often. And this will work too. Refresh, and I'll say my name's Kevin, blah, 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 blah. Okay, hello, Kevin, hello, Kevin. This will work. It's just the older way to do it. Until about 2015, this is how you would do it. And then in 2015, a new version of JavaScript was released, and it changed to let and const. There are some subtle differences between how they all work, but it's enough to know that var is the older way to do it, and generally you don't want to do it that way. Use let instead. And last, I'll say that the other way to do it is to not use any keyword at all. You can just do it this way and say name equals blah, 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 and I'll refresh and I'll say Kevin, and it'll say hello, Kevin, hello, Kevin, hello, Kevin. It'll work fine. This is technically valid. This is legal. JavaScript will let you do this. It's you know, it's fine, but it's generally not recommended. It has some weird side effects, and I'm not going to get too far into it, but I'll just say for now, like always use let to create a variable, and you should be fine. But as you search on the internet for other tutorials about creating variables, you'll probably see the other ways to do it. So I wanted to just kind of real quick mention them so they don't catch you too off guard. Okay, I think that's as far as I wanted to go with creating variables. Now you know the kind of fundamentals of how values work and how different types of values work. Kind of like strings and numbers is what we've seen so far, but we'll get into some others in later lessons. But for now, focus on strings and numbers and storing them in variables, and then using those variables exactly like you would use any other value by passing them into functions as parameters. Okay, that is creating variables in JavaScript, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.